All right, that was at the New York Mets Philadelphia Phillies game when they got the word that bin Laden is dead. The crowd erupting with, you could hear the cheering, USA, USA, USA. We're hearing that all over the country, certainly hearing it outside the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue, outside the north gate of the White House. Those are live pictures on the left part of your screen. On the right part of your screen at Ground Zero, no more sensitive spot. As we approach the 10th anniversary of 9/11, the crowds have gathered in lower Manhattan as well. It's now past 1:30 a.m. here on the East Coast of the United States, and the crowds are only getting bigger and bigger at the White House, at Ground Zero, elsewhere. Folks are just coming up and they're celebrating. Bin Laden is dead. So many Americans thought they would probably maybe not be able to celebrate as they are right now. But it was almost exactly about 2 hours or so ago when the President of the United States walked into the East Room of the White House and made the announcement.
Today, at my direction, the United States launched a targeted operation against that compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. A small team of Americans carried out the operation with extraordinary courage and capability. No Americans were harmed. They took care to avoid civilian casualties. After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
That was the president. Later on, we'll be replaying the entire statement that he made. Chris Lawrence is our man over at the Pentagon. He's got details of how the operation unfolded. For those viewers, Chris, who may just be tuning in here in the United States or around the world, this was a very, very risky, dangerous military operation.
Yeah, exactly, Wolf. And we may never know the names of some of these intelligence and special forces operators who conducted this mission, but they certainly undertook incredible risk to get this mission done. And when you hear some of the fascinating intelligence details of how this came together, you come away somewhat with the perception that in some ways, Osama bin Laden may have been the architect of his own destruction, in that he built a highly secure, isolated compound. But because it was isolated, he had to use couriers to get information and supplies in and out. And ultimately, it was those couriers who would be his downfall. As Gloria Borgia reported just a few minutes ago, the intelligence action on this really started years ago, but it really came to a head in January. That's when the U.S. found out that indeed Osama bin Laden may be located in a compound in Pakistan. By February, they had determined that the intelligence was good enough to take action. And by March, the president started to convene some National Security Council meetings with high-level officials, the last of which were held just about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago. Now, when this operation went down and what they were learning, this courier and his brother, who lived in this million-dollar mansion, had no real discernible amount or means of income. In other words, how do these two people afford a compound that's 8 times bigger than anything around it in a very affluent area? And then you start to look at the compound. The terrace had a 7-foot wall around it. It had interior walls. Some of the outside walls were 12 to 18 feet. Where other residents around them would take their trash out on the street, these residents burned their trash. And for a $1 million mansion, it had no cell or internet service. All of these were clues to some of the intelligence officials that something wasn't right. They determined, to the best of their ability, that their assessment was this was built specifically to house and harbor a high-value target. And as they worked that information, they determined that, yes, they believed it was Osama bin Laden, his youngest wife, and some of his children that were living there as well. When the assault came down, they looked at it and said, this is it. And when the word came down and President Obama gave the okay for this elite team that of the U.S. operators, which included some special operations units or members, to go in and try to take that compound, they apparently practiced how to do it beforehand, because when this compound was built, it was very isolated. It was towards the outskirts. But in the meantime, over the previous 5 years, other homes had been built around it. So now you've got a situation where there potentially could be vast civilian casualties. So they practiced this operation to try to minimize those civilian casualties. when they eventually went in, they went in during a helicopter drop, coming in through helicopters, coming into this compound. From what we're hearing from officials is that Osama bin Laden did resist. And our congressional correspondent, Dana Bash, is hearing from her sources that it came down to a firefight, and Osama bin Laden was shot in the head during this firefight in which the U.S. forces were able to take possession of his body. Wolf.
We know, Chris, that the U.S. government had a $25 million reward for the arrest, the capture, the killing of bin Laden. Do we know if anyone is eligible for that?
That I don't know, Wolf. You know, again, it goes back to the fact that, you know, when these intelligence and these special operations forces, they volunteer for this very dangerous duty. That's true. But from all accounts, this was a highly dangerous mission. The security around this area was called extraordinary. So the risk that this small team of U.S. operators took to try to accomplish this mission, again, because they're in the intelligence field, they're special operations, we don't know. We might not see their faces. We may never hear personally their stories, but they obviously took great risks to get this job accomplished.
They certainly did, and mission was in fact accomplished. We'll probably find out if somebody, a Pakistani or somebody else within bin Laden's inner circle, ever did provide the initial information leading to the capture, the killing of bin Laden. Chris, stand by for a moment. John King is over at the Magic Wall for us. John, the location of this so-called mansion, about 60 miles or 100 kilometers outside of the Pakistani capital of Islamabad, it's significant. Walk us through this.
Significant, Wolf, in part because how many times over the last 10 years have the Pakistani government officials told us, no, Osama bin Laden is here in Afghanistan? How many times have the Afghanistani officials tell us, no, he's somewhere here, Waziristan perhaps, in the mountainous region here? It turns out tonight, and let's take a closer look, and we'll measure it out for you as we zoom in. Turns out, where was he? About 120 miles to the east of the Afghanistan border. Waziristan, one of the places, the tribal regions where it was said so often, Osama bin Laden's probably hiding here. Instead, no. 120 miles to the east, 30 miles north of Islamabad. And let's take a closer look at this town, Abbottabad. We'll take a closer look as we come in, and you see somewhere in the ballpark of 1 million people. You see it's pretty highly developed here. A lot of tight, very closely in residential areas. You come up here and you look up here, a lot of educational institutions here. I want to bring you in on a location here. This is where we are told tonight, somewhere right in this area here, people are saying is where this played out. You see a large complex here. You see other large complexes here. You see a lot of building here, walled off areas, residential complexes within, walled off, big complex here. And then Chris Lawrence was just saying they were worried about civilian casualties because of other development around. This is one of the places we are told to look tonight. We don't have an exact location yet, but this is the area. And I want to just shrink this down a little bit and just show you again, bring up the terrain of this town. It's in a mountain valley. You see around here, around the outskirts, there are mountains around the outskirts. You come into a valley. It's a city of about 1 million people. Again, just look at this highly dense population up in here, Wolf. But as we look into this here, not in the mountains, not in Afghanistan, not in a cave in Waziristan, but in a very highly developed, highly populated area, we are told, is where this special operation played out. It'll be fascinating to get more of the details on just how they did this, but you can see right in here, if the SEALs went into an area like this, what a high-stakes, high-risk operation to try to capture and ultimately to kill Osama bin Laden.
And if they go in by helicopter, they come down on ropes from the helicopter, you can only imagine how vulnerable those Navy SEALs might have been. John, go back and show us the big picture, because I want our viewers to get a sense of how far from the Afghan border, and the U.S. has a lot of military personnel, more than 100,000 troops in Afghanistan right now. If those helicopters did in fact come from a U.S. base in Afghanistan, they would have had a nice journey there. Give us the big picture once again.
Absolutely. U.S. military installations on this side of the border in Afghanistan, again, for the past 10 years, as we have asked the question of presidents, of CIA directors, of anybody in the United States government, and of people in the Afghan and Pakistan governments, where is Osama bin Laden? The answer has usually been somewhere in this ballpark here. U.S. military installations here. You mentioned 100,000 plus troops. The president himself, and we are now told by sources, launching this operation, not telling the government of Pakistan, only telling them after the operation took place. U.S. bases here coming across the border, and again, let's measure out exactly what we're talking about. As you watch, you zoom in here, and you come off, and then we hit the measure, and you see exactly where we're talking about. 120 miles, once they came over the border, Wolf, 120 miles in, you're 30 miles north of the capital of Pakistan. Right in here, this takes out, again, for years we have focused over here, the tribal areas, the cave areas, the ungovernable areas of Pakistan. But instead, it turns out Osama bin Laden was living in a large city. This is not a suburb. This is a city of about 100,000, I'm sorry, of about 1 million people when you come into it here. And you come in and you see how densely populated it is. A very different kind of operation that for years people have talked about, finding bin Laden in a cave, finding bin Laden in a remote area, finding bin Laden protected by tribes up in the hills. No, in fact, it turns out bin Laden was hiding in a very densely populated area. And again, we are told to look at a complex something like this, somewhere in this ballpark over here, we are told tonight, one of the focus of the operations. And you can see some of the walls, you can see large spaces, but you can also see all around it, densely populated areas, which shows you the risks that any of the elite forces that went in looking for him, not only the risks of the firefight that we know took place, but risks of civilian casualties. And again, a very bold decision by the President of the United States to launch this operation and tell the Pakistani government after the fact that U.S. Special Forces were right here on the ground, Wolf.
Yep. It's as if the President of the United States, he got that 3 a.m. phone call, and he, whether it was 3 a.m. or whatever time it was, and he made the decision. It was a gutsy decision, as you point out, to go ahead and give the authorization as Commander-in-Chief to launch this operation. John, excellent presentation. Stand by for a moment because I want to bring in, just show our viewers what's going on at the White House at Ground Zero. These pictures, folks are still gathering, even though it's now approaching 2 a.m. here on the East Coast. They're gathering and celebrating the death of Osama bin Laden. Nick Payton-Walsh is our correspondent in Kabul, Afghanistan. Nick, you're getting more information from sources there as well. Tell our viewers in the United States and around the world what you're learning.
Well, at present, I think we have two conflicting viewpoints here. Pakistani senior intelligence official I've spoken to has made it clear that there were Pakistani intelligence operatives on the ground during this operation, which seemed, to be honest, to be the other side of the coin, completely conflict with what our sources are hearing in Washington. I think it's obvious why the Pakistanis would want to show they were involved in this. That's to preempt accusations of collusion that perhaps some part of the Pakistani intelligence establishment, which is pretty all-pervasive, frankly, in Pakistan, may have known that bin Laden had been hiding there for a long time. I think it's also interesting to point out where this compound appears to have been based, in a big, bustling Pakistani city. Now, just bear in mind that a lot of the recent Taliban activity has been in the southern city of Karachi. It seems as though the Taliban have been moving away from those tribal areas where the drone strikes can easily pick them off, and have been very successful of late, if you speak to some American officials, been moving to larger cities so they can hide in the bustling population. So hearing that bin Laden was not in Karachi, the kind of hub of Taliban, but in another bustling city, hiding somewhere else, that's not enormously surprising. But I think we're going to see, really, the Pakistanis having to explain how they were involved in this operation in the coming hours. It would, to me, be enormously surprising, given the sheer breakdown of trust in the last few months between Washington and Islamabad, given what they've been saying to each other about drone strikes, about intelligence cooperation here, which apparently had been on hold for quite some time, we shouldn't forget, according to a senior Pakistani official I've spoken to, that it would have been remarkably strange for the Americans, the full scope of this hit, this operation with them prior to launching it, Wolf.
You know, Nick, a lot of Americans will now say, mission accomplished. Bin Laden is dead. It's time to pull out of Afghanistan. The United States, as you know, has 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. The troops are scheduled to start withdrawing, at least on a modest level, later this year, this summer. All those troops are supposed to be out by the end of 2014. But I suspect, given the death of bin Laden, a lot of Americans say, well, it's time to leave and move on. Have Afghan officials expressed any concern to you that maybe the appetite for a prolonged U.S. military stay in Afghanistan may be going away?
I think they were already concerned before this, frankly. I do think there's part of the Karzai administration here that does not want to see a sort of hear a rushing sound, as a sucking sound, as the American forces pull away from here in the next coming years. We haven't spoken to them today, but I can definitely say there'll be two narratives from this. The first one will be with bin Laden dead, the Al-Qaeda threat is, the story of that, as it were, has come to an end. So yes, as you say, we can begin to start drawing down here, but that leaves the whole nation-building question unanswered. And obviously the reason why Afghanistan became a haven for Al-Qaeda al-Qaeda in the first place was because it was a failed state under the Taliban. So there'll be an alternative narrative in this too, saying that we need to stay here, finish the job, and be sure that the new al-Qaeda, if one emerges after bin Laden's death, perhaps a regenerated or a different generation of leaders maybe, that they don't seek to come back here and use Afghanistan as a base to launch attacks on the U.S. Wolf?
Nick Payton-Walsh in Kabul for us. Stand by. Fran Townsend is our national security contributor, the former Homeland Security advisor to President Bush. Fran, you know, even earlier, U.S. intelligence officials were saying there may be 100 or 200 al-Qaeda operatives left in Afghanistan. Now with bin Laden dead, you will fully, and the fact that the U.S. is spending about $2 billion a week, $100 billion plus a year in Afghanistan, the pressure no doubt will mount on the president to start withdrawing even more rapidly than he may have anticipated.
Yeah, I think that's right, Wolf, as a political matter. But let's just be clear. I mean, I think we need to put this in context. That bin Laden is dead does not mean the war against terrorism is over. We've been fighting these fractured cells. We've seen the U.S. government, military, and intelligence officials deployed around the world who continue to track these networks. They are nowhere near as dangerous. Bin Laden was an inspiration for recruiting and financing and weapons and all those things. So by no means are these other cells nearly as dangerous as he is. But we will continue to have to fight in chaotic places, especially where we know that bin Laden and al-Qaeda had really been attracted, whether that's Yemen or Somalia, the Mali-Mauritania border. We saw this recent bombing in Marrakesh and Morocco. And so the war on terror is not over. This is a significant victory, though, Wolf.
It's something that Americans have been waiting for a very, very long time. Dare I say, many Americans for at least almost 10 years, and so many others going back to the 90s, 93, the bombing of the first World Trade Center. Peter Bergen is here. He wants to weigh in as well. Peter, we're only beginning to digest what this will mean for the U.S. military operation in Afghanistan, the NATO operation, if you will.
Well, you know, there was big concerns in Afghanistan. I was there in December about President Obama's initial announcement that we would be drawing down in a significant way in July 2011. You may recall in November at Lisbon, President Obama announced a rather different policy, that we would be there really in strength until December 2014. I think a lot of Afghans breathed a huge sigh of relief. They know the Afghan army is still weak. They know the Afghan government is still weak. They're looking for, you know, the capacity to build up the Afghan army so that it can, you know, keep the Taliban at bay, so that the Taliban doesn't bring back not only al-Qaeda, but lots of other Islamist terrorist groups that were embedded with the Taliban when they controlled Afghanistan.
So so we're just going to begin to appreciate what's going on. I think in the days to come, we'll fully appreciate the nature of what this means for the overall mission in Afghanistan, cooperation with Pakistan, and all of that. Peter, thanks very much. Those are live pictures, by the way, from outside the White House, the north lawn of the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue, where folks have gathered even as we approach 2 a.m. here on the East Coast. They've got the flags. They're screaming, they're shouting, they're celebrating USA, USA, USA. That's here in Washington, D.C., outside the White House. In New York City, they're celebrating as well, especially down at Ground Zero at the site of what was the World Trade Center nearly 10 years ago. CNN's Jason Carroll is on the scene for us. Are folks beginning to leave, or are they still showing up, Jason?
Oh, no sign of leaving at all, Wolf. I mean, more and more people keep coming down here to Ground Zero. They're playing bagpipes. In fact, I ran into one of my coworkers. She was at a restaurant nearby. She told me that when the announcement came on the television, people went silent. All of a sudden, people started handing out American flags. They've been bringing them down here. They've been chanting. And more people are coming down here. I want to get some of the stories that we've been hearing about, because obviously, now that we've heard about what's happening, people are coming down here to reflect. They're coming down here, Wolf, to celebrate. I want to introduce you to Anita, Valerie, and Ronaldo. Now, you have a very special, this is a very special night for you, because you remember when it all happened back on 9/11.
Yes, we were here working in the area. This is our community. We watched the planes hit the buildings. We watched the people jump out the windows. We watched people flee in the area. And the day after 9/11, we still reported to work. We still had to come into the area, watch the cleanup, see the cleanup. We had to do our work within the community, was to bring Wall Street circuits back up, bring the customers back up as Verizon workers. And each day we watch this. We even watching now as they try to rebuild. This is very special to us because this now is finally a closure to the families who has lost their loved ones. It's a closure for the community, this community. It's a closure for New York City. It's a closure for the United States, and it's a closure now for the entire world.
And Valerie Ronaldo, are you feeling that as well? Are you feeling a sense of closure at this time?
Definitely,
Yes,
definitely. From everything that happened to what we see now, the World Trade Center coming back, is definitely closure to people that lost family and friends. It's just a beautiful feeling.
And it's amazing that Osama bin Laden, his death, we also now was at work for this occasion.
Thank you so much for coming, John. Well, very quickly, I also want to bring in Lisa and Mark Wilkie. They actually were watching the television, saw what was happening, decided to come down here tonight. Tell me about what this experience has been like for you, because you guys live here in the neighborhood.
Right. I think it's just an important part to be part of history and be here and celebrate with other New Yorkers and people in the United States about the celebration that finally he's been captured and obviously killed. So
You also heard Valerie talk about a sense of closure at this point. Do you feel more of a sense of closure at this time?
Well, I'm not sure if I feel a sense of closure yet, but it's certainly a celebration. There's a spontaneous outpouring of emotion. Perhaps it'll be closure at some point in the future, but it's certainly nice to come down here and feel a sense of community and people sort of rejoicing in what's happened tonight.
And I think for a lot of people who aren't from New York, Wolf, to be able to come down and see how the neighborhood has changed, how the neighborhood has grown, how you've seen Ground Zero really develop over the past few years, and then you see something like this happening today, that's just got to be really an incredible feeling as well.
Yeah, it's a great thing for certainly this neighborhood, but for the country, more importantly, that perhaps we've turned a corner a bit.
All right, we want to thank both of you. Thank you very much for coming down. Again, Wolf, it's really incredible. I know you were saying, do we get any sense of people leaving? I wonder what's going to happen as the hours go by and then people start waking up and the rush hour starts. The crowd just keeps continuing to grow. I want to show you over here more and more flags, more and more people coming down, chanting, singing. It's really just sort of a sense of a celebration that's happening down here. I know you've been experiencing it as well in Washington, D.C., at the White House, happening here as well, down here at Ground Zero. Wolf, back to you.
An appropriate place, I must say, Jason, for folks to celebrate Ground Zero almost exactly 10 years ago. In September, it'll be 10 years since those Twin Towers went down. Bin Laden now is down. He has been killed. We also have live pictures I want to show you from outside the White House. Outside of the north gate of the White House, the northwest gate. This is Pennsylvania Avenue, Lafayette Park. You can see the crowds there. Large crowds have gathered. We're told a lot of students from George Washington University, Georgetown University, American University, some of the other schools in the area. The students coming down, they're getting ready to end their semesters, but they wanted to celebrate. Many of these students, of course, remember what happened almost exactly 10 years ago when Al-Qaeda operatives did what they did in New York, Pennsylvania, and right here in Washington over at the Pentagon. Gloria Borger is watching all of this unfold for us. Gloria, rare that a president of the United States can make an announcement like this president did. Yes. I guess it's about 3 hours ago.
Well, it's right, Wolf. And I just literally got off the phone with a National Security Council official who, described this as one of the best days of his life. And I was asking about the confirmation about the fact that this is indeed Osama bin Laden's body. And he made it very clear to me that they have multi-confirmations on this and that they had the ability to do what he called run images of body and face of Osama bin Laden. I think there's a possibility that we may see that at some point, but he made it very clear to me that the intelligence community knows that Osama bin Laden is dead. And I think that's something, Wolf, that we're all just starting to absorb this evening.
Thanks very much, Gloria, for that. Gloria doing excellent reporting like all of our reporters, our analysts. This story is an historic story, certainly one all of us will remember for the rest of our lives, where we were, what we were doing when we heard the President of the United States inform us and the world that Osama bin Laden is dead. We'll continue our coverage right after this quick break. Much more coming up. Stay with CNN. The reaction only just beginning to pour in.
This is CNN Breaking News.